The Difficult Path, an excerpt by Grace Lynn. When I was sold to the Lee family, my mother let Mrs. Lee take me only after she promised I would be taught to read. Her mother had 14 other children starving and clinging to her, yet she was still insisting that I promise. Miss Lee sniffed and began a high-pitched imitation. Promise me that when she's 6, you'll have her taught to read. On your ancestor's grave, promise. You didn't have to agree, Auntie Wang replied peevishly. This was a story she had already heard many times. A girl! Learn to read! What a waste! Mrs. Lee continued, her annoyance at the past greater than Auntie Wang's with the present. Just because the mother had been a scholar's daughter. Then you shouldn't have lied, Auntie Wang said, rolling her eyes. She even helped herself to some honey lychees I held. I thought she would never know, Mrs. Lee said. I just said yes so that I could just take the baby and go. I made a soft coughing noise and placed the tray on the table. Mrs. Lee, I said as I bowed low, teacher is here. She snorted with irritation and waved her arm, her voluminous silk sleeve flapping like a flag of surrender. Go, she dismissed me. I hid my smile and tried to walk humbly, as all the browbeaten servants were supposed to do. Unlike Auntie Wang, however, I was not tired of Mrs. Lee's complaining story. I had no memory of my mother, but hearing how she had dared make demands of the formidable Mrs. Lee on my behalf always made me feel a sense of pride. Despite my mother's poor circumstances, she must have been spirited. And perhaps it was my mother's spirit that forced Mrs. Lee to keep her promise. For on the day I turned 6, a new tutor came to the house of Lee. As I cringed during my daily duty of emptying the chamber pots, I saw the top of his black scholar's hat glide slowly past the family shrine into the schoolroom. He had come for Mrs. Lee's repulsive only son, Fu Ding, of course. The learned scholar was yet another tutor hired in hopes that Fu Ding could be taught something. The last 2 teachers had departed in disgrace as well as anger because Fu Ding remained unable to read a single poem. Mrs. Lee had also refused the tutor's pay. My birthday and a new tutor's entry should have been of small consequence to the house of Lee, except it was also on that day that the incense of the ancestral shrine refused to light. Master Lee tried again and again, but no matter how large a flame he held, the incense would not burn. In desperation, Master Lee turned to the new tutor for answers. It is apparent, the scholar said, that you or someone in your household has shamed your ancestors. Perhaps someone has stolen something or has broken a promise. Of course, Master Lee nodded with respect. Then he snapped at Mrs. Lee. Wife, we have angered our ancestors. What have you done? The house of Lee roared into a typhoon as all, from the head cook to the lowliest servant, me, were questioned. Then it was discovered that it was my 6th birthday. Mrs. Lee remembered her promise to my mother, then paled and swayed like a blanched stalk of bamboo. It couldn't be, she said in horror. But it could be, and probably was, the new tutor said, and immediately quoted his price for 2 students. Mrs. Lee, still aghast at the revelation and fending off insults from her husband, did not even haggle over the price. She did try later, claiming that as a girl I should be cheaper, but he responded that because I was a girl, he should be paid more, as he was making an exception, so the matter was dropped. And I began my education. That was over 6 years ago. It was also over 6 years ago that I saw my teacher walk in with a new pair of shoes. Those shoes glided on the smooth stone floor, only hesitating as he paused in front of the shrine. With a sharp glance around, he quickly changed the incense, ensuring my lessons and his larger salary.